This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and we're going to be doing things a little bit differently today. My special guest today is Tom Nixon. He is a good buddy of mine. Say hello, Tom.
Hello. Hey there. Hi, everybody.
And normally I interview folks and get their great ideas, but I don't put too many of my ideas out there. I might throw something out in the course of a conversation with one of my guests. So I actually have asked Tom to interview me on the podcast so that you as a listener might know a little more about my perspective on some of the things that we talk about.
Who
in this
is this
podcast.
lady, Kelly Vandever, that we hear so much about everywhere? What's the story with her?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Tom. Yes, thank you.
All right.
Well, let me tell everybody a little bit about you too, because you're
Okay.
a marvelous human being and do a lot of great things. So you are an amazing speaker. You are a fantastic executive speech coach. You have a tremendous amount of talent as a graphic designer, and again, a terrific human being all around. So would you, let's see, your website is tomnixondesign.com. And Tom, would you like to tell them anything else about you that I haven't thrown out there? He's a new.
Gosh, who wrote that you just said? That
I
was
did.
amazing.
I wrote that because I believe that.
No, I've been doing this for a long, long time. I think in terms of graphics. I think in terms of how things look and I guess that's one of my real strengths is I can put myself in the place of the audience, whether it's the audience of a brochure or the audience of a website or the audience in a live presentation. I think a real affinity to put myself in their position and see what they see. So I try to leverage that when I'm coaching people, when I'm designing presentations. I do PowerPoint, that horrible program that everybody hates. I try to.
He does it in a way that's gorgeous, that nobody hates.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know. Anyway, I do try to put myself in the audience's position. How does this bounce off them? What's happening there? So maybe that's my biggest strength is being able to do that.
So if you're one of the leaders out there that are listening and you have an important presentation you really want to nail, Tom is an excellent person to reach out to and get some help from because he's marvelous.
I think so. The world of making live presentations, which is like the coolest place ever. You have such an opportunity to be a rock star and to connect with an audience. And if you can do that, and it just takes creating a conversation with them. If you can do that, you're going to supercharge your career. All good things will happen from that. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
All righty. Well, Tom, we normally start out our podcast here by asking a couple of quirky questions of our guest. And
Okay.
and since I'm sort of being interviewed today, what is that? What is that? Your Happy Father's Day mug for
That's my
2017?
favorite. That's my answer to one of your questions. Go ahead and ask your question, and I'll answer it. With that.
All right, I'll ask that question. So Tom, what is your favorite possession?
I have a Father's Day mug. Oh,
Ooh,
given to me by my grandchildren. See,
oh.
that's Katie Bug and Jacob, my two grandchildren who live in Augusta, and I have a series of Father's Day mugs. So every time I get a new one, that goes to the top of the possessions list. So
Oh, very
that's
cool.
So what's your favorite possession?
Oh, you probably already know the answer to this.
Yeah, I do. It goes vroom vroom.
It
right?
does. It is my Harley Davidson 883 Superloads
Oh,
Sportster.
you
Yeah.
are you're a biker girl,
I
a
am.
biker babe. Is that
Biker chick.
sexist?
I'm good with all
Yeah.
that nomenclature.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
And I have seen you wear things that are made out of leather.
I do.
So
I do.
that is very
Safety
cool.
first. Well, it's riding a motorcycle, so how safe can that be? But
And looking like a badass first. Yeah, come on,
thank you,
Kelly.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do enjoy riding my motorcycle tremendously, and our trip is less than a month away, this year's trip, so I'm really
And where
looking
are you
forward to
going
it.
this year?
This year we're going to Canada. Yeah.
Canada. Nice.
Yes,
Nice.
yes. So that'll be a fabulous trip.
Escape our global warming here in Atlanta.
It has been warm, hasn't it?
It has been, yes. Yeah, that'll be
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
My wife and I honeymooned in Montreal,
Oh,
and
really?
we've often talked about going back there and just chilling out for a couple of weeks, just bebopping around downtown Montreal, and because it's supposed to be the greatest city ever.
Well,
I've-
I followed you on vacation last year because you went to Maine and then we went to
Yeah.
Maine, and so we'll go to Canada and then you guys can follow us to Canada.
Okay,
How about
all
that?
right, you got to
Okay.
tell us all the cool spots.
Okay, we'll do. All right, excellent. So our second quirky question is,
Okay.
what is your favorite guilty pleasure television show?
Okay, me first.
Yes,
Should
you
I
get
go
to go
first?
first. You go first.
Okay, all right. This says an awful lot about me. It's Family Feud.
Really?
Yeah, I love Family Feud. But my second, you have to realize it's very carefully balanced with my second favorite TV show, which is Fargo. So ridiculous silliness versus the darkest side of human behavior whatsoever. So those two things, somewhere in the middle, I guess, is where I fall.
Wow. So are you
What-
like a huge Steve Harvey fan too, or have you
Yeah,
always watched
that's
it?
the
Or
Well, I did watch it way back when, but I've gotten back into it with Steve Harvey because I just think Steve Harvey personifies how cool you can be, how you can present yourself, how you can connect with an audience, and he's a funny guy.
Yeah.
And he's a funny guy, and he's bald, so he looks good. Yeah.
you have a kinship there.
Yes, we do. We have a connection. Go to the same barber.
Funny.
So what's your favorite TV show? I couldn't even begin to guess.
Oh, you're going to be probably surprised at this one.
Yeah,
So, I will watch pretty much any show that involves tattooing. I don't have any tattoos, have no desire to get any tattoos, even though I'm a
Really?
biker babe, but I am obsessed with every tattoo show that's on television. So.
That is amazing. That's incredible.
I think what it is, because I've asked myself, why are you obsessed with this? Because it doesn't make sense. But you're watching art being created. And I love
say
art. Well, it is. It is. If you've seen some of these things,
Yeah.
it's amazing what they can do with ink and some of the shows, they have these competitions and they do
I
art in
know,
other
I know.
forms and such too. But I just love watching the art being created. I don't like all the drama that goes along with some of the shows, but being able to see what people can do, because I do not have that artistic gene in me, and
I don't think I've ever watched one of those shows. I've seen a lot of if you cruise around the internet anywhere, you see people who do outrageous things with their bodies, which is, some of it is just so far beyond description. It just makes you cringe. As a matter of fact, there was somebody, and this may go way, way beyond you, but I remember seeing a thing from Pixar. They were showing the inner workings of how Pixar creates a presentation. And the guy who was giving the presentation had one of those ear plugs that
Yes.
stretches the ear out,
Yeah.
and it was down past his chin. I couldn't look at him. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's I'm a guy from a different generation or whatever, but so that whole world, that's interesting, Kelly.
yeah, I'm not into the earring looking thing,
No.
no shows about that, but
Okay. All right.
but the tattoo shows, I just a little too
Okay.
obsessed about those.
I will file that away and put that in a place and say, what was that all about?
Fair enough. Okay. Well, and you had Fargo, so
Yeah. You watched Fargo?
I have not. I saw the original movie, and yeah, that was pretty dark. So
Yeah, pretty dark.
Yeah.
Pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about good and evil, which is a fun thing to talk about.
yeah.
All right, we should do something here today. We should
Yes,
talk something
yes.
important.
So I understand that you've been self-employed for what, 30 something years?
Yeah,
Yeah.
since pretty much since my daughter was born, and she's 35.
Okay, okay. So, but before that, you
Hmm.
did work for other people, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, suppose. With limited success.
Well, that probably is a subject for another show altogether. But
Mhm.
but the aspect that I'm curious about is the ability to feel like you had a voice at work. Did you feel like you could speak up at work in the different kind of roles? I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about some of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, let's see. The few things that I can remember, I worked in a very structured union management situation in a machine shop with 1,000 employees there, and I felt like I had no voice whatsoever. It doesn't mean that I didn't say anything. It would generally get me in trouble, but speaking up was not something that was appreciated by either side of that equation. So that was kind of bad. I worked for a building contractor when I first got out of school, and I was just a painter. And the fellow I worked with, I guess I always felt like I wanted to participate and be involved in making decisions. And maybe that's just my inability to keep my mouth shut, but that was reasonably encouraged, but not too much. It was, you kind of, when you're 20 years old, a lot of people are looking at you going, what does he know? And so you really don't get a chance to connect. Um, I did work for a lumber company. I was a salesman at a lumber company after I got out of school, and yeah, I really felt like I could speak up. I could have a big voice, but that had to do with the personality of the man I was working with. It wasn't anything about the structure of the organization. This fellow was just he was open to everything. He had self-confidence, so he didn't
Mm.
fear people contributing. So,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting,
And then I
interesting.
kind of went out on my own, and probably that was one of the big reasons why I did, because I felt like I could, make my own way in the world, make my own contribution. I didn't have to get permission from people. So I haven't really, um, although when I'm in client meetings, sometimes I have to play against that. I have to worry about keeping my mouth shut. Sometimes they don't appreciate. I have notably said a few things at times where I've walked out of a meeting and gone, probably shouldn't have said that. That may cost you a client, and it has on a couple of occasions. So, um,
Have you
yeah.
also found that it has been welcomed by some of your clients to have
Yes.
that voice to hear an outside perspective that maybe they're not
Well, I
open?
hope that when my clients hire me, that's what they hire me for, to be that trusted advisor role. Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes it depends on the corporate culture and the person you're dealing with. Sometimes they are very appreciative of bringing in somebody who's got not even just more experience, just a different experience.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I find that it requires a leader who has confidence, self-confidence. They feel safe that um, they're not going to be subverted or I don't know, contradicted or made to look foolish or whatever. It's
Interesting.
it. I think it's a confidence thing. I've always felt.
Interesting. Very cool. Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So let me ask you about you. I know you have a Navy background. A Navy background is not always the place where you feel like you can speak up in certain situations. So, how did your concept of exploring people's understanding of their permission to contribute to speak, where did that develop? Where did that come from in your experiences?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess there's a lot of stereotypes about the military, and some of them deserved and earned. But I found that a lot of my experience was similar to when I went out to corporate America too. So it's not as different as a lot of people think. But I do remember early in my career, my first duty station, in fact. there was this process in the Navy that if you saw something that you thought could save the Navy money, you were supposed to follow the process and bring it up and make a recommendation. And I think there was even a percentage award that you would get should they accept your recommendation. So at my first duty station, there was a woman who was in the role, I believe it was called social director. And I really just thought it was an unnecessary role. Now, I wouldn't go about trying to get somebody fired because that just didn't feel right. But she announced that she was going to retire. And I thought, okay, this is the perfect opportunity for me to make a case that we really don't need this job. We should eliminate it, and then, we'll be saving the Navy some money. That's part of what they want us to do, right? Mm-hmm. So I wrote up I did a little research. This is the day before the internet, so I had to make a few phone calls. And I found out that this particular job title, there wasn't anything like that when I went through ROTC. And so that's part of the reason. So the first command I was stationed at was Aviation Officer Candidate School, was one of the main activities that happened there. So it was a schools command that had several different types of schools, and one of them was Officer Candidate School, like officer and a gentleman, when they get their commission. So, right. So since the commissioning source that I came through didn't have a role like that, I didn't think it was necessary. And in fact, there are other commissioning sources that do not have that role. The only other two that I found were in Washington, D.C. at the Navy headquarters. They had somebody in that role, which I thought was understandable because it was D.C., yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And the other place was the Naval Academy. And maybe that's a little bit different. Right. Mm-hmm. So it didn't make sense to me. So I did a write-up, and I submitted it up my chain of command, and my boss didn't seem to have an issue with it. But when it got to my commanding officer, he evidently did have an issue with it. I don't know what it was. He didn't share that with me. He just gave it back to my boss and said, "Make this go away." Yeah. So I'm like, okay, this is not a hill for me to die on. I'm not so passionate about this. I know I'm right.
Kelly versus the bureaucracy.
Yeah. So I just said, okay, consider it withdrawn, and that just, sent a message to me that.
Did you feel like that was a lesson learned about speaking out about something and say, well, I won't do that again?
A little bit. It did make me hesitate to speak out. So I was I'm fairly opinionated now. I was really opinionated as a young person, but it didn't totally stifle me per se, but it did let me know that people aren't always interested in hearing the rest of the story, that there are other, and there may have been other good reasons why he didn't want to do that. Now, one kind of complicating factor in this is that one of the women that worked for me had always wanted to take that social director role. So when she heard that the other woman was resigning, she let me know that she was going to apply for that position, and I also let her know that I was putting up this campaign to eliminate the position because I didn't feel like it was needed. So even though so when he asked me to withdraw it, part of me was like, well, that's okay. Now Kathy can get that job, and I know that's something that she really wants. And so I didn't feel terrible. And she, as last I knew, is still doing that job, and that's been like.
Oh, so she did get the job.
She did get the job, and she did it for at least 30 or so years. She may have retired by now, but so that was one of my first lessons.
So were you 5 years old when you were in the Navy? 30 years. Come on.
So I was right out of college. So right out of college, I was commissioned as an officer, so I was in a leadership role at a very, very young age. In fact, all the people that worked for me at my first command were civilians. The first group of people. Later, I got a couple of sailors that reported to me, but all the people that are initially reported to me, civilian employees, were all older than my parents. So I'm 22 years old and I'm their boss. So that was a different kind of a situation.
I remember you telling me a story about that situation that was like put you in a very, very difficult spot trying to very gently assert leadership to people who were old enough to be twice your age. Yeah.
Well, and actually, they were wonderful people. So
Yeah. Still, there's
yeah,
that dynamic that's always there underneath everything. Yeah.
exactly. But
Now, the I have situations like that come up with. I know that this is supposed to be about you, so I won't say too much. But when I go to a client meeting, very often I am presented with an existing project that somebody has worked on, somebody's struggled with, or whatever. And I've learned very, very early to be very careful about critiquing things that are in existence in an organization because you never know whose toes you might be stepping on. And so maybe in that situation, the person who defined that role was this guy's wife or was him maybe. So, you're commanding officer. So and that really goes back to feeling comfortable enough to give permission to speak. A good leader will say, you know what? I may not like what you're going to tell me, but I want you to tell me.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that was a lesson that I really felt like I took with me going forward. And in fact, at that very same duty station, I would be in an on-call type position. I was the officer of the day on a rotational basis, and that's one of the things I used to tell folks. I make the ultimate decision, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
So advise me, tell me what it is that you see, what your recommendations are. I'll make the final call. I may make a different decision, but give me the information. I want the
Yeah.
information.
Like if there's a big old iceberg out there, come tell me, please.
Well, we were shore based back then, so
Oh, okay.
yeah. But
Yeah.
and then my second duty station, I had a great leader as a boss who really taught it to me, that feedback piece in a very visceral, memorable type of way. So our command was the HR department for the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. And one of the responsibilities we had was processing travel claims. So Navy regulations required that when somebody transferred to a new duty station, for instance, coming into Pensacola, or when they went on a temporary duty assignment, like a business trip, that we would pay them travel expenses. We would pay them for
Sure.
different things that they incurred. And we were required to process those claims within 30 days, but we were averaging like 45 days.
Does the government do anything within 30 days?
Well, we were supposed to.
We're supposed to.
And of course the problem with not doing it in 45 days or not doing it within 30 days was not just that we weren't following regulations, but
Costing people money.
exactly.
Yeah.
The sailors were having to come out of pocket, or they were incurring credit card charges to charge their expenses. So not a good situation. So my boss at the time formed a project team, if you will, to figure out how to address this issue. So we pulled people from different parts of the organization that were involved in the process, and he put me in charge of managing this project group. Now, the challenge for me was I didn't know how to fix this problem. I was I was new to the command. I hadn't really figured out how things were working, and I had never done the job that they had done, which is fairly common in the military. But
You were in charge of a group of people that were doing something that you had never done.
that I had never done. So
Okay.
I had no way to know how to solve this problem. I didn't have a preconceived notion going in on what everybody needed to do to make sure that this got done. If it was going to be fixed, it was going to be fixed by the people that were in that room, the people that were part of this project.
Right.
So we had a couple of meetings and talked about the existing process, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And just in the it took a period of time for us to come up with this. It wasn't like a one day and we're done type of thing. So somewhere along the way, I was talking to my boss and just kind of giving him an update about how things were going. And my boss had a suggestion on what to do. He said, "Have you guys thought about doing XYZ?" And now, see, the deal with my boss was he had done the job that they had done.
Ah,
He had been prior enlisted and was promoted to an officer position. So he had some insight on how to solve this problem. So when he made that suggestion, I'm like, that's a great idea. Nobody's come up with anything that good. Come to our next meeting, tell everybody this idea, and that'll get us going on the right direction. And he said, no.
what?
And that's what I said. I'm like, what do you mean no? That's because I was an AB student, right? I knew you wanted the best answer, and his was clearly to me a better answer than anything that the ideas that we'd been coming up with. And he said to me, if they come up with the solution, they'll make sure that it works. And I thought,
Wow.
you're crazy, I thought him crazy, old man. I just, you don't know
So
what
he
you're
didn't
talking
just
about.
give you permission to speak. He demanded that you speak.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
He said, it's your job. You do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So,
very cool. That's great leadership, I think.
well, and it turned out the results were what really blew me away. So
Mhm.
we started with 45 days. Navy regulations said we had to get to 30 days. We got to less than 10 days.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I couldn't.
My God.
I know. I couldn't believe
Very
it. So, so that right there demonstrated to me that one, the leader often doesn't have all the right answers, and even if he or she does, if you're willing to have the courage to say, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And get folks involved, that they will come up with a solution that may be even better than what you would come up with. But the buy-in was a huge piece.
Right. They own it now. And that makes all the difference in the execution of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feeling that they're committed. Well, that's a very cool story. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people that, I don't know about you, but I have a couple people like that in my past, leaders that I've worked for. And I constantly remember some of the things that they said to me and go back and revisit that. The people like that make a huge difference in people's lives, and not necessarily because they've done anything incredible, but just because they've done something like you talked about. They've made that difference in confidence and investing in you and believing in you. That's very cool. That's a very cool.
And every time I've ever done a management class where we've talked about your best manager, what do you remember about your best manager? Listening always comes up.
Oh yeah,
Comes
yeah.
up. And so so for the leaders that are out there listening to this, think about what you can do to listen to your folks and to give them that opportunity to come up with those great ideas that may be even better than what you would come up with yourself.
So that's the origin of your story. That's where permission to speak kind of germinated in your mind.
Right.
How do you spread that concept to the people that you work with? Tell me a little bit about that. So who are the people that you work with, and how do you connect with them with that message?
Well, there's a number of different ways. So a lot of it depends on the client that I'm working with. So what are some of the issues that are going on in their organization, understanding what they're trying to do. So there's been a lot of things written about employee engagement in the last several years. And one of the things that has really woken it up is the fact that people were talking about having great customer service and having customers be at the center of what you do, but people found that it wasn't enough to just say we're going to dedicate ourselves to customers if they were treating their employees like crap. So if an organization is really willing to make that change, if they're willing to evolve and shift into that new direction because of whatever the motivations are, then I can help them give voice to the employees. So looking at processes, looking at some of the underlying structures that might exist that give people that stifle people, or that subliminally or not so subtly tell people it's not okay to speak up here. It's not okay to.
Right. A lot of people get that message, boy. It's like you say, you get the message that, you know what, I'm not going to do that again. That didn't work, so I'm going to go try something else. Now let me ask you a question. I like to interrupt a lot, but let me ask you this question. So let's say you walk into XYZ Corporation and they're they're an open slate. They haven't figured out anything yet. Would you say, let's get your employees invested in your company, and the customer service will be a natural progression from that? Or do you, or is customer, because I know customer service is the holy grail of businesses these days. Everybody's talking about customer service. We've got to work on customer service. We've got to get that, and there's training and everything like that. But it almost seems to me like if you treat your employees right, getting them to give good customer service is just going to be a natural progression.
Right. And kind of in that question too, part of what I'm pulling out, and part of what is part of the podcast, one of the reasons why I focus on this in the podcast, is understanding the bigger purpose of the organization, understanding why it is that we do what it is that we do. And back in my corporate days, I worked for a telecom company, Alltel. They got bought by Verizon Wireless a few years ago, and the part of the company that I worked for was doing writing billing software. So not exactly something that maybe seemed like it had a higher purpose in life, writing billing software. But then when I took a step back and thought about how important, and this is before a bunch of smartphones were out there, but even then, the importance that cell phones were having in our lives, not just organizations, but people as human beings. And so when I was talking to my staff about it, I'm like, it's not just about that we're writing billing software. It's about what we're doing to support cell phones in people's lives. I mean, think about the news that you get on the cell phone. Congratulations, you're going to be a granddad. You know, I talked to the doctor today. I've got some bad news. Or just pick up some diapers. We really need diapers at home.
Right.
Those conversations are really important in people's lives. And so it's not just about the things we're doing to check to make sure that the things are QA'd and that the software performs as we expect it to. I mean, it's a larger purpose here. We help this organization help people's lives. And after I left corporate America, I got introduced to TEDx Talks. I know you know TED Talks.
Sure.
And I listened to Simon Sinek and the why, knowing the why about what your organization does. And one of the people I had on the podcast last year, Melissa Gordon.
I know Melissa.
Yeah, you know Melissa. And she told us a story about working with some folks from GE that were working in the Middle East, and she was trying to help them understand the purpose behind their work. And one of her, after thinking for a while, one of her students said, "Melissa, is it like when we originally came to this country and they had 4 hours of electricity a day, and the minister called us into his office the other day and said, I want to thank you because we went from having 4 hours of electricity to having 20 hours of electricity a day. Is it like that?" You know, and she's, you know, she was like affirming that.
Yes,
absolutely,
yes,
absolutely.
exactly like that.
Yeah. And so after I heard Melissa talk about that, I started asking students in my management classes what was the higher purpose of their organization. And for some people it was easy. You know, there were people in the class that were curing cancer, you know.
Yeah, right.
I remember this one participant in particular. She said, she was about halfway through the class. You know, other people were saying what their organization's higher purpose was. And she was like, I just honestly can't. I can't think of what our higher purpose could possibly be. And she worked at a company that managed apartment complexes. People's homes.
Yeah.
And yet she couldn't see that, you know, what they had an impact on was on the place that people came home to every night. And so that just kind of reiterated to me, we don't always take time to reflect on how our individual contribution makes a difference to the larger world, whether it's the customers and that we service. And I think that's an important point to remember. So when
well, there's a reason for why we all do everything that we do, and when you lose that connection, or you never had that, it sounds to me like that person you were talking about had never been indoctrinated or given that feeling that this is why we're here. It was just like you go to do this, and here's the things you do during the day, and then you're done.
Right.
And
And now, and what's challenging about that, she's not alone. There's a lot of companies that don't
oh,
do that,
gosh,
and she's in a leadership role.
yeah,
So she's not helping her employees feel that
right,
same kind of
right.
ownership about here's why we do what we do. This is something bigger than just us. So
Hmm.
so you ask the question in working with organizations, part of it is that connection to the bigger purpose, and then the culture that goes behind that.
Right.
So, do we talk about things like, how we serve a customer and how that's meaningful in their lives?
Hmm.
Do we talk about and then the openness that we've already been speaking of? Is that part of our culture? Do people make a difference? Can we have that permission to speak? And how do we make it better for
Right.
us internally? And how do we make it better for our customers? So.
Wow. Yeah. Now I know that you work in that, or you help people find the technology that helps them facilitate that kind of connection with their purpose, their why, their customers, their clients, that open communication. You want to talk something about that? You want to tell me a little bit about that? Because to me, my idea of the most powerful communication is just one to one. So I'm not too up to date, let's say, on some of the things. Somebody asked me to join. I guess I've got a connection with a one of the people I work with on Slack,
Hmm.
and it took me a while to get comfortable with that. I'm an
Yeah.
old guy, and although I did find it was very useful after I got used to it.
Yeah, yeah, and
But
that's
tell
the thing.
tell me a little bit about how that all works.
Yeah, so back in my corporate days, I was in an organization. I was with the technology company, right? We did technology, and I kind of have I really appreciate what technology can do for people and organizations and connect people, and so I already had that kind of a bend, but I was in a situation, and I agree. First-hand, one-on-one conversations,
Hmm.
those are the best, but they're
Yeah.
not always possible. But we were in a situation. We had acquired another company, and this company, we acquired them because they had a good hold in a particular marketplace that we wanted to be present in, and they had great software that they used in this marketplace. But part of the challenge was they did not have enough people that to keep with the customers that they had and with the additional work that we could grow. And so I was asked to go manage this team to help make them feel part of the bigger company, although
Hmm.
some of their welcome to the company had not gone as smoothly as it maybe could have. And so there was a little bit of animosity in the group that I was managing about being part of this acquisition in the first place. And so the idea of these outsiders that they now belong to this company coming in and learning how to do their jobs was threatening to them. And they weren't super open about being willing to train other people to do what they were doing. So it was a bit of a challenge from that perspective, but it was part of our business mandate that this is something that needed to happen, and it made sense. And so I worked with my folks to try to get them more comfortable with that, but it wasn't enough. They were already super busy because we were short staffed, right? So it was just like this perpetual thing. So within the organization, I found a tool that was a knowledge sharing type of tool. And it was being used just here and there in a couple of parts of the organization, but I figured out how to get it created for this new group that had to do with this particular technology, this particular software. And so we created a message board, if you would, like a discussion group using the software. And what ended up happening, there was one guy in particular that was not part of my group. He was in the development organization. And so I had the new employees that were trying to learn the software, they'd go on this discussion board and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out how this part works, And this guy from another department would get in there on a regular basis and answer their questions and be really helpful for them. And I thought, that's amazing. That's the kind of just nice, good kindness that you just pray for.
Yeah. Right.
But the technology facilitated that now.
Right.
And he facilitated it because he cared enough and was willing to take time away from his other responsibilities to help other people out. So obviously he cared and that was an important aspect of it. But other people in my team saw that he was getting involved, and they had a lot of respect for him already. So it helped have this kind of unexpected consequence of pulling people closer to those newbies that were getting
So it kind
involved.
of snowballed in a good way.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just interesting and fascinating to me how that connection started getting made. So fast forward, and I left corporate America and started about the same time that I left corporate America is when social media started catching on. And Don Garton, who I interviewed like on my first podcast, was really getting into social media, and she and I became friends, and so she told me about Yammer and how that worked, and then just some of those unintended consequences of it's supposed to be a collaboration tool, but what also ends up happening is that executives up the chain of command who maybe would never have heard from this guy down here see some of the things that he's doing, and that how he's contributing to the organization, and he's building a reputation because of a tool, because of this platform that he can use, and having come from the software industry where you have a few introverts that are part of
just a few
that are part of technology. It's easier for them sometimes to have that extra time to think about it and put it into words and type it on a forum versus sitting in a meeting and articulating the same ideas when they just haven't had time to germinate and to think about
this is the way they interface with a lot of the world. So this is much more comfortable for them to connect with people that way. And it's fascinating. That's great.
Yeah. So that's why the technology piece kind of got added to the discussion on this podcast forum, is because I find it kind of fascinating myself about how those things have evolved human relationships, ability to make connections, ability to collaboratively work on things, and to have people have a voice in different levels of the organization that they might not otherwise get exposure to folks up and down the chain of command.
I really like the concept of it appealing to introverts, because there's so many. I mean, you and I are both. You probably would consider yourself an introvert, but I've seen you speak, and I know how engaging you can be in a public situation. So, and I can do the same thing. But there's a part of all of us that's an introvert that wants to blend into the woodwork, and having that technology facilitate that, give their ideas can be presented in their way to the world, and so they can feel comfortable. And that's a pretty cool thing. And you know what? I must admit that I've never really seen technology as facilitating that kind of ability in people across the board. So that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, listen, I don't know how much more you want to talk about. I did want to ask you.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of these answers, but I want you to talk about your speaking career. You're the past president of NSA Georgia, and you did an amazing job at that. You were, I'm not sure it was your speaking skills that were showcased then, although you're an amazing speaker. It was your devotion to an organization, because I felt like this organization is in great hands when it has people like you at their helm. But tell me a little bit about your speaking career and why you're crazy enough to want to stand on a stage. And because I do this also, and I know it's one of those love-hate things. I can't tell you how many times before I've given a presentation, I've said to myself, why on earth am I putting myself through this? Why am I doing this? This is insanity. So I know that you struggle with that too, but making those connections are powerful things. Tell me a little bit about how that works in your life, in your world.
Yeah, well, you know where the joy comes. It's from the other side of that
It is.
anxiety. Yeah,
Absolutely.
when you are talking about things that can make a difference in people's lives, and from the leadership aspect of things, you're not just impacting that leader, and helping them see the world in a different perspective. And I had teachers that did the same thing for me.
Hmm.
I went to leadership classes, and they helped me see a different perspective. But when you're facilitating those discussions with leaders and with your audience, and helping them see the view of the world maybe from a different perspective. You don't just impact them and their ability to be a better leader. You impact the people that they're leading. And
Right.
so it's just seeing those light bulbs go off, seeing people
Yeah.
go,
Oh,
oh my gosh, I've been doing this wrong this whole time, and
I know.
this would be much better, and just all those different things that you realize that you can have an impact. And I've been blessed. I have the gift of gab. It got me in trouble when I was in elementary school, but now my father is thrilled that I get paid to speak to people. He sees my talent being used for good instead of evil. Uh,
Well, with a name like Kelly, I can't imagine what heritage you have that would lead to that gift of gab. So, yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
you are a brilliant speaker. I remember, and you are a great trainer. I was at a presentation just recently. We did a workshop together, and I did my little silly song and dance where I just felt like I was just being the clown, the class
And you
clown.
were great. You were great, though.
Wow, we've got a fan club going here, don't we? But I remember you gave what was it, a 15 or a 30-minute quick, here's how you find stories, here's how you build stories. It was a storytelling workshop. And you help people because stories are one of those things that everybody wants to tell a story. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to coalesce ideas. They don't know how to find those things. And you gave such a powerful presentation. I thought in 15 minutes, you showed them such amazing stuff. And I think that that was, I stood there and I said, dang, she's good. She's really good. So I really enjoyed it. And I learned a lot in that situation from you and how you craft those things. So
Well,
good job.
thank you. And what I love about stories, especially for leaders, is what that can do on so many levels in building a connection between leaders and their staff.
Mhm. Oh,
Just the human connection. There's something about stories, we can't help ourselves, so we want to hear them. And
it attacks a different part of our brain and
yeah, yeah,
just clicks in, and you're going, oh yeah, okay. You're
yeah.
just you buy right in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So and I think that's part of that human connection. I think we
Mm.
try very hard to be professional in the workplace, and sometimes we need to be more human. And
Mhm.
I've developed a program called Professionally Human. How do we still do the things that we need to do to make work effective, but also let the person side of us come out,
Right.
the humor, the stories, the reasons that we get out of bed in the morning, the things that really motivate and drive us. Make sure that we keep that stuff alive in the
Right.
workplace, so we can.
Right.
It works. Everybody's better on so many levels because we're bringing our whole self to work.
I have a story about doing that with stories. A real quick. Yeah, as you know, I do a weekly slide of the week. I'm a PowerPoint guy, and I send out a little tip, one little tip, maybe just 100 words, 200 words every week about do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. And it's just generally for the most part, it's just generally do this, don't do that. And I uh, paid attention to somebody that I follow a lot, and in his weekly emails, he always introduces it with just a little short story, like I was working with Bob, or Susie was doing this, or something like that. Just a sentence or two, and it wasn't anything deep. It wasn't like a long, involved story. And I started putting together, not in all of my little weekly emails, but I started introducing them with a quick little story. I was working with Sam, who was putting together a presentation for his board of directors. That was all I needed to say. And the response I got from the people that I send my emails to was instantly completely different. They were totally invested in listening to what this was. It all of a sudden became real and meaningful instead of just a little check-off list or something like that. So that's my story about stories. But I am never. That's why I watch Fargo. That's why I'm not sure Family Feud is his story, but it just connects with us so deeply. It's astounding.
Yeah, absolutely.
People are missing a big opportunity. I remember I was in a class once with other speakers, and this was a long time ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and we were all encouraged to tell a little story as part of our speech. This was about speaking. And I remember one of the people who was in our class, a good friend of mine now, she had used to work at IBM. And in the old days, when everybody wore a white shirt and tie and, everything was done exactly the right way. And we talked about telling stories. And I remember she said, if I had told a story like that, my boss would have come up to me and said, don't ever do that again. And I thought, that is just such an amazing thing. Now, I'm sure IBM is not that way now because
not, yeah.
You see their advertising, you know that they're all involved in stories. But that old corporate concept of we don't do that. We give the facts, we give the benefits and the features, and we don't do stories. And what an opportunity has been missed by so many organizations for so long.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad to see that people are embracing stories now and seeing the difference it makes.
I've talked to a number of people about this too, and I said, well, if you don't want to say story, just say example. Here's an example, or here's a case study. If you want to sound like you went to Harvard MBA, don't use that dreaded word story because it sounds too much like butterflies and unicorns. But it's the same thing, and people connect with it. It's an astonishing, powerful tool.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and
if
that
used
is
for good.
If used for good, it can be, and it definitely can be. And then, so thank you for bringing that up. And I know that is part of some of the programs that I do for folks that I know.
Workshop.
Thank you, yeah. And I know it makes a difference, and that's what I love. So
yeah. Well, you see, you talk about the lights coming on over people's head. I saw you do a small workshop once with maybe 10, 12 people. And I think the first half of the workshop was just presentation skills, general type of things. And he said, we're going to do the next hour or two, we're going to do a storytelling module. The place exploded with excitement. And these were very dedicated people. This is a nonprofit organization. I know you know who I'm talking about. Yeah. It was a nonprofit organization. People were very devoted to what they were doing. All of a sudden, you were giving them an incredibly powerful tool to connect with the people they wanted so desperately to connect with and influence. So that was very, very cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, well, Tom, thank you for being my guest interviewer and letting me talk about myself a little bit on the podcast. I appreciate it.
I really tried not to interrupt you too much. I'm a big interrupter, as my wife would tell you. I do that all the time.
Well, and Tom and I go way back, so it's always good to talk to Tom. I always learn something when I talk to Tom. So, well,
it's a pleasure being on your podcast. This is great. I hope I haven't ruined it too badly.
Oh no, you're fabulous. Thank you again, Tom. This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.